Myself, Dr. Rakesh Agrawal, Secretary General, Risk Management Association of India. So, a very warm welcome to all of you in our live webinar on climate change, Elephant in the Boardroom. Just as COVID-19 requires us to act now to save the next few weeks and months, save lives in the next few weeks and months, climate change requires action now to avert a future catastrophe. So before I hand over the session to our today's speaker, Mr. Praveen Gupta, let me briefly introduce our organization. So many of you must be knowing, but still for the newer audience, risk management basically is an NGO engaged in promotion of risk management discipline in India. RMAI has taken this onerous responsibility to create a platform for risk professionals, insurers, bankers, and corporates to exchange news, views, articles, resources relating to risk management, encourage research and development, provide online courses on risk management, and do all such activities that will help to promote risk management in India. So basically, we are also creating a library of resource in our website, rmaindia.org, where we are creating a resource of the materials available in videos, in terms of reports and all. So you can our members can visit our website to view those resources. Here's a list of our council members, and we have advisory council. Then we have experts from the industry who are expert in various fields. We have different category of membership, which ranges from fellow associate, and a normal student can also become a member. And we keep on organizing various activities related to essay writing contest, technical paper writing contest from time to time. Last year, we organized this seminar in Mumbai, Risk Management Challenges in New Era. So it was a quite successful seminar. So this year, again, we plan to organize another seminar, but maybe it will be a bit delayed due to COVID, but we would be doing this year. These are some pics from the event. And we also publish a quarterly bulletin, Risk Management, from Risk Management Association of India. So in this bulletin, we include articles and research studies and latest update about developments in risk management in India. So for more details, you can visit our website, and you can also contribute in whatever way you can. And now, our today's speaker is Mr. Praveen Gupta. Mr. Praveen Gupta is a thinker, thought leader, and a proven professional with profound understanding of the insurance industry. He pursues his passion of exploring, learning, and sharing from the exciting intersections between climate crisis, diversity, governance, risk, and tech. He aces his passionate views through his blog, thediversityblog.com. Mr. Praveen Gupta, an alumnus of St. Stephen College, is a chartered insurer and a fellow of Chartered Insurance Institute, UK. Till recently, he was at the helm of insurance insurance industry in India as a managing director and CEO of Raheja QBE General Insurance Company for more than 11 years. A recipient of D. Subramaniam Award and S.K. Desai Memorial Prize by Insurance Institute of India, Mr. Praveen also received a special prize from Geneva Association and the Group Study Exchange Award by the Rotary International. So I now welcome Mr. Praveen Gupta and would hand over the session to him. And we are really grateful to him to have agreed for this session. So hopefully we have a very engaging session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh ji, for that kind introduction. I really appreciate. Good afternoon, all the viewers. Appreciate your having agreed at a short notice. But I'm always delighted to talk about climate change from a larger holistic perspective. So, at the very outset, grateful thanks to RMAI India for organizing this. This is a wonderful platform, and I'm so delighted to see the numbers of people who have come in at such a short notice. So, as I keep saying, I'm not a climate expert. I'm uh, an insurance person, incidentally, in this um, theme or this subject matter of discussion. The core area is risk. um, I'm going to avoid jargon as much as possible, but there are some key phrases that I want to sensitize you about, which uh, will become common day parlance as we go along. Yeah. So I hope this volume is good enough, Rakeshji. I'm sure you're all able to hear me. So there are emerging benchmarks, and there are some management allusions and metaphors that I will mention, because very often I find that a lot of metaphors are used out of line, and some of them are actually um, quite out of time. So we need to be mindful of what we are saying and what we are using. Um, Insurers, I will bring in only when we start converging into how all these emerging risks converge into the boardroom. So all this while the boardroom was well insulated, but today, thanks to climate change, that insulation has come off. And rather than these risks touching the boardroom, the board has kind of, I would say, notionally extended to the farthest corners. I mean, things can trigger anywhere in the world, and all kinds of triggers can impact the well-being of an organization, and the board is the heart and soul of the organization. So that needs to be mindful. The key of today's presentation or today's discussion is to bring in governance, ESG, and sustainability into focus. So, while a lot of evolution has happened around governance, where it is today is not by itself, but with two very key aspects. One is environment, and the other is the societal aspects. And these are very important. Again, I will allude to COVID, most unfortunate pandemic that has kind of shaken the entire globe and the human race. And I don't see COVID as something outside the realm of climate change. I will also bring that onto it. So when I broadly talk about climate change, I would like to give you a framework. Basically, I think of climate change from the perspective of what, say, something as credible as Scientific American talks about. It's the weather systems, it's the ecosystems, and it's the human habitability. I mean, those are the three basic frames within which we will play. And I'm going to be talking to you about many things very quickly, and then to kind of talking about a few metaphors, and perhaps recommend you my preferred, what should I say, reading list. It's not very long, but I will take you through that. So I will start with an author I know very well um, uh, by name, and again, I'll stick to as much of Indian thought process. Not that we don't need to bring in the global spirit into it, but I'll start with that. So Amitav Ghosh, I'm sure you've heard of him. I've had the pleasure of knowing him, and we've been contemporaries during our times in the Delhi University, long ago. But I do keep in touch, and what influences me most is his lucidity about how we ignore the forces of climate that we have unleashed and that are going to increasingly impact us adversely if we do not do something about it. So, two of his books. I'll start with just showing you the books. So, one of them is The Great Derangement, and this book is like the Bible of climate change. I would strongly recommend that. It's not a thick book. It's under 300 pages, not even 300. And this is a great book which everyone should read and gives a perspective from where he is coming. The other book that he has written as a sequel, and I'm not recommending you read one after the other, you could read anytime, is The Gun Island. So whatever he says, and which I will touch upon, is basically a lot of this influence coming from these two books, because he is the foremost thinker of not just fiction and all kinds of other subjects, but also climate change. And his major concern, which I share, is that climate change so far has been a narrative of only, or narrative dominated by the Europeans. We haven't really inculcated it into our art, history, culture, in our day-to-day narrative. Even the Americans are struggling, and I'll allude to that. So that's a major thing which he points out. And then he highlights a lot of things which I will keep coming to from time to time. But he is a master author, and to get a perspective, not just an Indian perspective, but an Asian perspective, particularly a South Asian perspective, he is phenomenal. We will take questions at the last. So I'm seeing some popping already, and kindly keep them brief so that I can have the pleasure of talking to as many of you as possible. So I'll start with Paris Agreement, something that you should be familiar. So in 2015, all the countries agreed to a certain framework. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but the framework was how to bring down two things. One is the carbon dioxide level, CO2 as we call it, and from that comes in carbon footprint and many of the other jargon, but you need to be familiar with that. And two is the temperature, because as the global warming happens, what really happens is there is more precipitation, there's more water in the air, there is more implications for how the planet behaves in terms of rainfalls, in terms of droughts, and all these things then impact parts of the globe in different ways. It makes it unpredictable, and we are seeing a lot of that unpredictability coming in. I'll again come into the details, but I thought I should bring that out straight away. Carbon dioxide. So what is it that carbon dioxide does? Over millions of years, the planet had a stable CO2 level per ppm, as they call it. It suddenly started shooting from the times of Industrial Revolution, but more so from the times of the post-war scenario to today. It has zoomed from 300 to approximately almost 420 ppm. So it's significantly high. So it's not just the CO2 which is dangerous, because it also warms the planet unduly and then impacts all of us, as we are seeing. By cutting forests, by emitting all kinds of greenhouse gases, whether these are from our cars, whether these are from factories, these are from generating power. So all this, even agriculture, livestock, infrastructure, everything is contributing to the global warming and to the carbon dioxide increase in the planetary constituent. So that's the level it has already reached, and that's very scary. With carbon dioxide, there is methane, which is 3 to 6 times more dangerous, and of course nitrous dioxide or trioxides, which are also emissions, which are very dangerous, and they are a major cause of cancers and serious respiratory and other trouble that we are facing, and no health insurer or anyone can fix that. Unfortunately, because of our economic activity or whatever before we slowed down prior to the breakdown of the current pandemic. But I don't believe the order has changed. China remains the largest polluter. America is number two. That's United States of America, and us at number three. So even being not so rich or not so poor country, we are somewhere in between, but with a vast majority of poor still dominating our society, we have become number three polluter. And that's why it's very, very important that we are mindful of our consumerism, our aspirations, and we fix that. So I come to that as we go along. We are the most powerful species ever created, as we believe, and this is called Anthropocene, that this era, because it's dominated by the Homo sapien, and we believe we have conquered everything, and we are the masters of all. But then the nature has pushed back by sending a virus, which has really humbled all so-called high and mighty. There's because of all these pushbacks that is happening, we are seeing all kinds of signals coming in. Like for instance, dengue in Europe, in cold countries, malaria is becoming all over, is reached all over. The ice caps are melting, and there's significant rise of seawater level, and countries will gradually get underwater. Countries like Tuvalu, Maldives, and even Bangladesh are already experiencing the impact. Our own Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai would be significantly underwater by 2050, and we still don't treat them as risks. The tropical storm activity has increased, and this has, mind you, I will leave some of these thoughts for you to figure out what are the implications for insurers. Because if we are insuring properties or assets in today's vulnerable geographies, or the geographies increasingly becoming vulnerable to storms and flooding and all that, then the boards are taking a lot of risk on their not just balance sheet but their fiduciary liabilities. The air pollution. At one place, if you read Amitav Ghosh, he brings out the fact that, say, for instance, Mumbai, we will see increasingly tropical storm activity in the Arabian Sea. And he has warned many years ago that Mumbai could be another Fukushima in making. We have a nuclear power plant sitting just on the outskirts of the city limit. What used to be an outskirts is now no more an outskirts of the city limits. And if a storm hits, and if there's a combination of flooding and some kind of other combination of natural forces, then we could replicate a Fukushima kind of a situation. So all these are things that risk managers, insurers, boards, everyone have to be mindful of. Air pollution is so high. I don't need to say, but the irony is that Delhi air got cleaned up only by the virtue of the coronavirus. It's so high that every 3 minutes in India, as the global burden of disease says, a child dies every 3 minutes. Particularly exposed states are Rajasthan, UP, and Bihar. So much of the erstwhile Bimaru is still sick and getting sicker. The carbon footprint is something which can be scientifically tracked, and the American lifestyle, which we all want to kind of replicate, is something that as insurers, as risk managers, as planners, as strategists, we need to be mindful that we don't get onto that path because it's dangerous and not sustainable. So sustainability is key. There's also a diminishing trust, particularly against big corporations. So their boards have to be mindful of that. So for instance, Amazon today is one company which has benefited the most out of what we are facing today. So their orders are growing, uh, so rapidly that they have to augment more and more of their logistic capability. They are one of the few large corporations hiring thousands of people to meet that requirement. But it's not all clean there. There are lots of people who are rather going to a mom and pop shop than to Amazon, because Amazon has a supply chain which is not sustainable. So a lot of activists have started boycotting what you call Amazon because of their unsustainable supply chain. So that's something which is a growing realization, and that results into diminishing trust. So whatever their founder may say, uh, whatever be his size of balance sheet and market cap, people will increasingly question that business model, and the boards and the fiduciary responsibility will need to be answering that. So um, that's the larger reality. What we need is a circular economy, and that's another phrase that you should get used to. So whether it's plastic, particularly single-use plastic or whatever that we dump into our environment, it doesn't break down. It has to be. I mean, it stays into the systems, and then it creates hell of a problem to the environment. So you need to have things which can be sustainably circulated time and again, and don't impact negatively our environment. Um, Unfortunately, the most affected in today's world, and before I get into that, we need to be mindful that basically, while we are closing the barriers, or we are from globalizing, we are localizing, but unfortunately, that is not within Homo sapien control, because the borders we may close, but the virus can fly, or virus can reach anywhere beyond the borders. And the other forces that have been unleashed, which is the climate change and related forces, are going to impact everyone. But unfortunately, the poor countries, like Africa or South America or parts of Pacific or South Asia where we are, the impact is disproportionately high. So we need to be mindful as risk managers about all those risks which are increasingly building up. So I'd like to just quote something which is important, which comes from Institute of Public Policy Research. And it says a new highly complex and destabilized domain of risk is emerging. So mind you, we can't talk of a fire policy or a liability policy or a workman compensation or whatever you call it, health insurance. We need to look at it holistically. So it's a highly complex uh, and destabilized domain which is emerging, which is affecting virtually all areas of policy, politics, and it is doubtful that societies are adequately prepared to manage this risk. So, what is insurance or what is risk management? It is nothing but standing up and meeting the challenges of the risks this planet is facing, or our society is facing, or our economy is facing. But the very nature and texture and the complexity and the scale of risk is so significantly growing that we can't be sitting tight. We have to start understanding these complexities to begin with, and then only we can start addressing it. I keep talking about the third pole. I'm sure everyone's heard about it. So we keep saying, oh, the North Pole is so far, the South Pole is so far, the Arctic is melting. It'll take a long time for that water to come here on our on reach our seashore or reach our front waterfront before it impacts us. It may not happen for 2 generations. But mind you, the global warming is a very all-pervasive, dramatic action that is happening. What is also happening, the third pole, which is the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush Mountains, is very, very critical piece of frozen world. So after the two poles, the most amount of uh, frozen water is available in Hindu Kush area. And what is happening there is the glaciers, most of them are melting. There are some glaciers in Hindu Kush which are growing, but most are melting. And what will happen after a point is we are already beginning to see increased flooding of rivers in Indo-Gangetic plains. We are also seeing not just here. I mean, the countries impacted are many because there are so many river systems, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's India, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's Burma, whether it's Laos, Cambodia, and that side, or Vietnam, or China. So it is estimated that with the receding glaciers, with the water supply going down, 2 billion of global population would be under threat. And there are some metaphors that I want to bring in. One is black swan. You would have all heard about it. Now, black swan has become a cliche. Not that it has become irrelevant, but everyone uses black swan in any context. So I was shocked to see that people were alluding to the COVID or the corona incident as black swan. Now, the world knew. I mean, if you remove the noise, the signals were enough. It's not just Bill Gates. There are a lot of scientists and a lot of thinkers, including another thinker I want to bring in, which I will. And I would say that is the Bible of risk, which you should read as a must if you want to progress your career and your reach. It's a must, and I will come to that as we go along. So what's happening is basically as the glaciers melt, first will come a surge of water. And once there is no water, there'll be a dry spell, and a dry spell which will never go till something dramatic happens. So there could be period of prolonged drought. And imagine, forget all other countries. So it's whether Mekong, the Yellow River, the Irrawaddy, all our the Sub Sindhu or whatever rivers, all these will dry. And what will happen to us, say the Indo-Gangetic plains, which are going to be most affected? What will happen to the people? We are seeing how the migrant labor has moved per force from where they were to where they wanted to be. But at that point of time, there'll be nowhere to go, and they'll come and push themselves into cities, and it's only up to, I mean, no army, no police can control that kind of force unleashed. I'll just give you a small example, and that takes me to closer to Middle East in Syria. And why Syria? Because it almost triggered a third world war. There is a small region called Salamia, and that was known for the best cotton cultivation in the world. Today, Salamia is a desert. Why? Because the water levels were going down, and they kept on drilling subsoil as far as they could, and then there was no more water, and they had to abandon. So all the farmers and the rural population would start going into cities and towns and whatever. And there was destabilization. Very often we think of many of these issues in terms of religion, whether it's ISIS or whatever you call it. But that was a result of the destabilization that happened, that people were expressing themselves under banner of some force, evil or not so evil or whatever. That's not for us to talk about. But the issue is these things get colored, and the real issue gets forgotten. The real issue was there was a massive migration in a relative sense to the cities, and the destabilization led to the drawing of all the superpowers. You had Russia bombing, and you have American and NATO forces, and it all hell broke loose. Thankfully, it came to a kind of a reasonable end, but at what cost? Now, you juxtapose that situation to something in South Asia or larger part of Southeast Asia, or even parts of Far East, which is China, you can imagine the vicious force it can unleash. So these are issues that we need to be mindful as risk managers, because this is what is coming. So it's not a black swan. It is what author. I'm sure you've heard of Black Swan and the author. Nassim Taleb, he's himself said this virus was a white swan and not a black swan. So he has himself clarified that we saw it coming, and there was no reason why we should have missed it. But there's another author, and these are management metaphors which will become metaphors of our day-to-day lives. There's another author called Michelle Wucker, someone I've recently come across and interacted with, and she's come with a phrase called the Grey Rhino. And the Grey Rhino is something which she first brought out at the time of the Greek financial crisis, where people saw, the meltdown in Greece and the inflation and the devaluation of the currency and a whole lot of other issues. And the West was sitting tight. The Greek leadership didn't know what to do. And then suddenly the worst happened. And she alludes to that as a Grey Rhino, and then she has used that time and again, and more so in context of the coronavirus. So much of this metaphor will come into the risk language. In fact, I've started bringing that into my writing in a very modest way, but I'm seeing more and more risk managers alluding to that. So a small thing that many of us saw in Mumbai was the chopping off of trees in RA. RA is a kind of it's called milk cooperative, or RA. It used to be part of a much larger forest. It's still very pristine, but some trees had to be chopped. Some of them were more than 200 to 400 years old. And unfortunately, when you advance and you want to develop your infrastructure, you need to pay a price. And what happened was the trees were chopped, and a lot of protests were triggered. And unfortunately, it was very brutal force that was unleashed. And what I liked was an editorial in Indian Express that said that we should stop playing cat and mouse games with people. And it's time that we treat these people as stakeholders. So the point I'm trying to make is that the board's responsibility is moving to all kinds of stakeholders. And these stakeholders need not be your policy holders, your shareholders, your employees. These could be anyone, everyone. And when you are talking of the liability classes, the third party could be anyone, everyone. And it's the larger environment in the ESG which becomes important. So as risk managers, you need to be mindful. And not only just ESG, there are two things which are globally now being packaged into a larger framework, which is still very loose, but will tighten as we will see unfolding of what has happened now. One is the principles of responsible investments, PRI, and the other one is PSI, which is principles of sustainable insurance. So the only signatory, and you can realize the irony of it, in the financial services in India, to my knowledge, or probably one of the two, was Yes Bank. So despite being a signatory to principles of responsible investment, we've seen a near demise of a financial institution. So how irresponsible can that be? And in a much more litigious environment, the board could have been really into serious trouble. Again, I must also, in the same context, bring you to the fact that today banks, particularly in Europe, which is at the front line of climate change adaptation, banks have finally started accounting for the climate change risk. So how do you account for it if you first don't accept it, and then you start assessing it, and then you start looking at mitigation? So companies and assets that produce a lot of emissions might suddenly see collapse of the values of assets. And a new phrase comes in, which is stranded assets. So mind you, this is another thing which risk managers must uh, bring into their dictionaries, because those of you who are not familiar must accept the fact that this will increasingly become a more important, key central theme for risk managers to mitigate. So first is how to ensure that we are not creating a stranded asset, and two is then how to deal with the situation. So a lot of oil energy business is already getting into that situation. So like for instance in America, particularly North America, Canada and US, um, in the last couple of years, they started exploiting oil from the tar sands, and which was a breakthrough technology, but extremely devious and damaging for the environment. And that made, uh, because of that production, like for instance, a lot of that production is happening in Canada, in the state of or province of Alberta, and that is they are trying to put in pipelines to move it to refineries as far as Texas, which is almost bordering Mexico. So a lot of uh, not only damage is happening because of the tar sands being exploited for crude and other fossil fuel, but because of all this happening, you're clearing a lot of forests, you are taking over a lot of pristine land, and you are damaging the local ecosystem and biodiversity. So it's a huge thing that is happening. And if tar sand promoting companies fail, the banks will be seriously affected, because in North America, unfortunately, the culprits of fossil fuel championing are three. One is the asset manager companies, management companies. Two is banks, and three is insurers. So alone in the state of Connecticut, where a lot of insurers are headquartered, both international and national North American companies. What is happening is they are big funders of fossil fuel business, and they have calculated in the last week's debate that just these three together have investments worth $250 billion. So a lot of this thing about insurers insuring fossil fuel industry is not just the issue. The bigger issue is insurers funding the fossil fuel industry. So that also, for that also, a lot of insurers and their boards are coming under pressure. Europe has given in. Most of the large European insurers and reinsurers have started getting off coal and fossil fuel, A, insuring, and B, both investment. So that's what is happening. Now, fossil fuel by nature, it's highly capital intensive, and it is also highly subsidized by the government. So that's a double whammy, which creates a big risk for society, where alternate energy is emerging. So the effort of all boards has to be to digress towards that part of the business, move non-renewable to renewable. A lot of pressure has come from pension fund companies, and particularly the uh, also the church money of say particularly Church of England. In fact, a lot of activism, and one name that has now become iconic is Greta Thunberg, a young girl who's only 17 now. She got into activism while she was not even 16. She's gone and met Pope and many other leaders, and her troops and her followers are putting pressure, whether these are young kids or whether they are grandparents. All across Europe, a lot of pressure has been built, and the Pope has called some of the top oil companies and spoken down to them and said, we need to fix this, and you need to move towards graded downward emission level, and the rewards and recognition and the emoluments of your top board members and the executives has to be linked to that. So a lot of this risk is now coming back to haunt companies which have been creating these problems. So a lot of financial regulators and courts are increasingly recognizing that directors have a fiduciary duty to assess, manage, and report to shareholders on all key risks. So this is something I have borrowed from Tim Buckley, who's one of the top directors of International Energy Economics Agency, and all these key risks have reporting has to be not only started but increased. So these are new risks which one has to be mindful of. A quick list, a laundry list of some issues: sustainability pathways, policies, and frameworks. There's a new regulation which D&O underwriters have to be mindful of, SMCR, where for the first time senior managers will be held personally accountable for governance failures resulting into financial consequences of climate change. Another term that you need to be mindful of is greenwashing. So a lot of companies try to show that fossil fuel, they've dealt with things. So like a simple example is a lot of people peddling normal vegetable or fruits as organic, which are not organic. So that is greenwashing. So if you were to scale it up to all kinds of things, whether it's clothes we wear or the other consumables we use, these may be bad for the climate, but they may be packaged and sold as PETA free or climate friendly, and whatever. So all these phrases are coming into the risk parlance. Decarbonize. So how do you reduce the carbon levels and the carbon footprint? Beyond meat, a lot of meat, particularly, it's nothing to do with religion, but increasingly a lot of Americans and Europeans are becoming vegan because they want to get away from meat, because dairy produces one of the highest levels of carbon dioxide emission and methane. So how do we decarbonize? They're also looking at it. So beyond meat is a vegetarian meat. So it is being synthesized from meat, from vegetables. It looks and tastes like meat, but is actually of vegetable origin. Carbon tax. Carbon tax is another thing where there's a new phrase again, which is coming again and again to dominate climate change discussion, is externalizing. So a lot of things we use, whether it's a car or whether it's an aerosol, all this has it has an environmental implication. So when we use it, we not only derive a level of whatever satisfaction we have, but we also damage the environment by using it. So that needs to be accounted for in the pricing. So if you can't price it, then you factor in the damage each component of that does and pay a tax on it. Redlining. Now that again comes from a very important phrase in the jargon for insurers, particularly in Australia and California, where a lot of properties or parts, even liability segments are becoming uninsurable because not only of high frequency of some claims, but because of also high severity. So there is a combination of high frequency and severity. So insurers and reinsurers are saying we don't want to insure this part of California or this part of Australia. So even though we will want to talk about penetration, it will become so much uninsurable that you will not be able to insure it because reinsurers are denying it. Green Deal. So Green New Deal is something which was part of the American presidential race discussion coming from the Democratic Party. Unfortunately, it has come to a stall because of the current situation, but Europe has replicated that, and that will make things very difficult for countries trading both in services and goods with Europe if they don't comply with their new regulations and expectations. So all this is converging into boardrooms, and insurers must come on board to kind of not just understand, but to recognize, to quantify, and then only mitigate. So, as I said, please remember some of these phrases well before I just start addressing your questions. So, stranded assets, um, externalizing. You can't, interpret these risks in terms of all the cliches of the past, like proximate risk or proximate cause, or a remote cause. We need to bring in a lot of realization that uh, protectionism and globalization may be part of trade wars or whatever, but these risks are, they don't recognize political boundaries. We need to also accept that we push the environment so far, and corona is not the first pushback. If you see series of things that have been happening, whether it's ebola or nipah or whatever, SARS and MERS, these have been coming from time to time, and the level has heightened to what we are today in corona. But again, this is not going to be the last if we don't stop pushing or stop dealing with the environment in a friendly way. And again, this is all cross class. You can't think in terms of health insurance, you can't think in terms of liability insurance. We are seeing our policies and wordings becoming redundant, because you're saying business interruption can only happen or can only trigger if there is a material damage. And now that's ridiculous. That has to change. That will change. Some parts of the world we are seeing innovative and proactive clients as well as providers responding to it. One example is Wimbledon. We just saw them canceling their this year's event, and what came out, which not many people, including our IPL nor the other Grand Slam tennis events, do. They take an infectious disease extension with their other covers, and hence they are covered. So you need to anticipate that. The one example I'll give you, again, stepping a bit into insurance, is about 4 years or so ago, I was talking to one of the big contracting firm, or rather the building firm, which created quite an iconic hotel near the Bombay International Airport, Mumbai International Airport, and he was telling me how they've done everything possible to make sure they have a foolproof format of insurance. So he said, we've done valuation and we've paid so much for our valuation exercise, this and that. My only thing was just one thing, sir. I said, what is the dependence of your hotel on this airport in terms of traffic? And he says, what do you mean? I said, what if this airport shuts? To what extent will your balance sheet be affected? And he said, 85, 90%. But can that be covered? So the problem is, we need more and more of imagination to play in. Insurance is nothing but a response to our needs. Yes, we haggle over pricing and all that, but we have come to a situation where clients and prudent customers will realize that this is a time to look at widening their covers, and this is a time for innovation for risk managers, and this is a time to push the front. So having said that, I will stop talking. But before I stop talking, I promised you I'll show you the one last book. This is the Bible of Risk, as I call it, for the 21st century. Yuval Harari, you would have heard his name, Yuval Noah Harari. This is 21 lessons for the 21st century. So I would strongly recommend that each one of you read this. It's not science fiction. It is real history unfolding before us, and this is history of risk. Not all of it would be insurable, but much of it can be mitigated outside the framework of insurance, and I would say please take it seriously. So with that, I've come to a virtual end of what I had to largely push in your direction. I hope it makes sense. I know I put in a lot into that, but I'm happy to answer your questions. If you can be, as I said, brief, I'll appreciate that. So let's make an attempt. I'm sorry for having taken this long, but I'm so passionate about it. I wouldn't want to let go of this opportunity when I have a large and valuable audience like this. So over to the questions, Rakeshji, how do we
Yeah, on
take?
the left side we can see the questions, so we can you can just and you can scroll the
Yeah,
button.
so some of these are very long ones. So it says like
You can scroll
yeah,
it.
okay. So I'm looking at the first one. So it says, can the speaker describe the cause of climate change? Well, as I said, the cause is very simple. That there are things that happen in the nature which 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 is cyclical, but much of what we are seeing today is largely emanating from fossil fuels, largely emanating from global warming resulting from the use of fossil fuel, and whatever else has happened. um, Carbon credit insurance. Well, there is, but I don't want to get into insurance. The idea is not to talk about insurance, but as I said, it's a major flaw, carbon credit insurance. It has not progressed. What is happening is nobody is agreed to how to deal with it. But basic thing is it was basically a swap of sorts. So if I can manage my business, okay, there is something which I would like, Shivrajji, you've written that point there. Good to see you attending this. But there's something called CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project. Please visit that site. And very recently, I interviewed their India director, Damandeep Singh. If you check my blog, it will be a good starting point. Not too long ago, you will find Damandeep Singh's interview there, and he alludes to many of these things. So I would leave it here and say that it's not working, but the idea is to create a swap between those who have disclosed X amount of emission and those who are able to do X minus something, and those who are going X plus something. How do you do the balancing act? But this is jugglery. This is not really mitigating the climate risk. Then you have yeah, what are your views on carbon credit system? It's not working. So that's all I would say. uh, Al Gore once said in his documentary that sea level would eradicate cities. Yes, it's already happening. So the cities have been named. Bombay is one of the biggest case studies, and we are sitting tight. It's a Grey Rhino. It's not going to be a black swan. If 2045 people wake up and say it's a bloody black swan, we can't do anything. Here, the bankers are lending for construction. People are removing mangroves and building big properties. It's Bombay is a serious case study. You're going to see this in Calcutta. You're going to see Jakarta. They're moving the capital because it's a sinking city. So all these, much of Southeast Asia will be underwater. Bangkok, much of Vietnam, a part of Cambodia, a part of Laos. So all these will go underwater. Shanghai is supposed to be underwater. So all this will keep on happening. Any impact from methane and nitrous oxide? Oh God, it is worse than carbon dioxide. Methane is a killer. Its impact, as I said, is 3 to 6 times. Yeah, Shamji, another question. Yeah, certain insurance policies. Well, liability lines business were incorporated by companies. Why cannot climate change? Well, I think we need to first understand what this risk is about. It's not about this class or that class. As I said, climate risk deserves a cross-class solution. So let's not first come with a product. First is to understand the risk and then widen our understanding and depth of that risk and then come with a solution. So to me, if you think of an ideal cover, if I have to think of an ideal cover, it will cover everything. So it will have as I said, cross-class. So it will have property, liability, everything that you name it will be covered. So if you look at what COVID has done, so the properties are sitting quiet. I remember when I joined the industry, the big debate was what happens there is a nuclear war. So the asset class will be sitting, and it was a joke that okay, if all of us would be dead, who's going to be getting the benefit of that insurance? So I think we need to tread a pragmatic line, but first we need to understand what's the risk, what do we what do we need to cover. Let's not think in terms of proximate cause or this line or that line. We need to understand all the interplay and then come with a cover. Well, Nepal, yeah, we've seen, unfortunately, it's a great country, but so prone to earthquakes. There's so much tectonic movement happening. There's a big earthquake overdue to happen in the Indo-Gangetic Plain. It's not me saying, it's 100 years overdue. So we saw, rather than Indo-Gangetic Plain, something hitting, unfortunately, Gujarat in 20 years ago. And it was so devastating. So yeah, I mean, these are things which will happen. Now, again, I must tell you, very interestingly, if you travel to parts like Alaska and all, what you will find is that the glaciers have melted and moved. So what happens is the glacier is not thin ice. It can be not even feet or meters. It can be miles of blocks of thousands of miles of this thing, and it moves and it creates tremors in the earth. And when it melts, the earth rises. So not only if glaciers melt will dry our rivers, but it could also create a lot of upsurge of land from down to up. So it's a very scary proposition. So Abhijit ji has a question. The boards have been caught napping. Of course, most of the boards have been caught napping, and you've started seeing climate action. So, like for instance, I must tell you a very good question. There's a company called PG&E. I mean, this is an energy utility in California. So it became the first bankruptcy from climate risk. So it's a very intricate situation. I'm glad you raised that issue. So the issue is that this company was providing electricity, much of California. And then much before the forest fire news hit the global news channels from Australia, California was burning. And the fires became so intense and severe that that company had to declare bankruptcy. So many lawsuits have been filed. So that's become a classic case of climate bankruptcy. This is not the, as I said, this is the first, yes, but this is not the last. We are going to see this, as I see it, and I believe very strongly, a lot of fossil fuel companies, a lot of other energy companies will face the flak, but then many others will face the flak. So climate change, interestingly, COVID caused a trigger. The first trigger was Norwegian cruise lines. I mean, they were hiding the news from potential customers that there was potential pandemic exposure to vacationers embarking on a cruise, and then people went for a cruise and they got infected. So there's a D&O action on the board of that cruise line, and as I see it, whether it's Australia, whether it's Europe, whether it's North America, these are highly litigious societies. Just wait for COVID to go, and you will see a whole lot of suits and actions and even class actions coming. How do you integrate, from Mr. Mendiratha, climate change with ERMS? Well, again, let's not get into jargon. As I said, it is basically ESG, which you need to understand. I think all these should converge into ESG. I think our current mindset as risk managers is to kind of put in too many compartments. My plea and my appeal is, I don't understand many of these jargons myself. All I understand is we need to have a holistic approach. In fact, I've been having a lot of go with some very senior people in the climate governance globally. And I'm telling them, look, please don't confuse people with new words, new abbreviations, new coinage of jargon. Please make it simple so that the common man understands this is a problem, this is a solution, this is what I need to do. What else? How does it impact from Mr. Bhattacharya? How does it impact globally on consequential loss policies? So again, as I said, well, the supply chain is one of the biggest examples. So we saw that with floods in Thailand. Certainly, a lot of what originated, whether of Japanese making or Korean making, a lot of silicon chips or whatever that came from these companies out of production in Thailand. The flood made people realize that things will get blocked. So now if you have consequential losses with suppliers extension or customer premises extension, there's triggers waiting to happen. There are some who may have even taken infectious disease cover. As I said, Wimbledon has that cover. In conjunction of what policy, I don't know, but I highlighted that in social media. So yeah, a whole lot of things will come from that. So we have a question from Shyam again. So policies from liability lines of business.
I think.
Any thoughts on cost of climate mitigation investments can be reflected and reduce climate? So whole lot of, rather than saying what people are estimating today is two things. One is the current cost of being proactive, and two is cost of eventually what will embark upon us. So they're saying by the end of the century, the total implication of climate change monetarily, I mean, there will be massive other challenges which have not been factored in, only monetarily, will be far more by many times than all the money in circulation in the global economy today. So the choice is ours.
Yeah, I think now we are running out of time.
Okay, so thank you very much. I really appreciate if there are questions which remain unanswered or there are issues, I'll be more happy to connect. Rakeshji, you can kindly coordinate. I'll be happy. But once again, grateful thanks for this opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks a lot, Mr. Praveen, for a wonderful session.
Pleasure.
And I think we had an engaging session, and we got to know a lot about importance of climate change. So it was always a pleasure to listen to you, Praveenji.
My pleasure too.
I would like to thank our audience who participated in such a large number and in such a short notice. So we shall keep on arranging this sort of seminars again and again. So thanks again, all of you. So we will see you again. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rakeshji. Pleasure.